They locked me in the dog cage, laughing like children pulling a cruel prank. She's no different from strays, my daughter-in-law chuckled, the keys jingling in her hand as she shut the latch with a sharp, metallic snap. I didn't scream, didn't beg. I sat down slowly on the damp mat, my back against the cold wire wall, and let the smell of metal, fur, and old pee wrap around me like a shroud. At 76, I'd lived through harder things than a night in a cage, but never something so humiliating. It had started that morning when I came to the shelter unannounced. My shelter. My late husband and I had built it from nothing but heart and hands. I used to scrub the floors myself, feed the sick ones by hand, name every dog, and remember who liked chicken better than beef. We didn't call them strays. We called them residents, souls, survivors. I hadn't been inside in 6 months. Once Harold passed, I'd signed over day-to-day operations to my son, Brian, and his wife, Lacey. It was supposed to be temporary. "You've earned rest, Mom," Brian had said. "Let us take it from here." I believed him. I shouldn't have. At first, they called to update me. Then the updates stopped. Then the calls stopped. When I asked to visit, there was always an excuse. "We're remodeling. We've got a staff meeting. It's flea treatment day, not a good time." But this morning, something in me pushed past their walls. I walked straight through the front door. The teenage receptionist barely glanced up before muttering, "They're not here." But I heard voices in the back and recognized Brian's bark-like laugh. I walked past her desk and into the hallway, my shoes silent on the vinyl floor. The walls used to be painted with bright murals, kids, pets, flowers. Now they were a dull, lifeless beige. I peeked into one kennel. No blankets. 2 dogs huddled together, shivering. I smelled bleach and mildew. "Mom?" Brian's voice from behind. He sounded like someone catching a burglar. I turned. "What's going on here?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You can't just walk in. This is not a good time." "I see that," I said flatly. Lacey appeared beside him, arms crossed. "You're overreacting. We're cutting costs. Blankets get torn up, and the dogs chew them. It's safer this way." "Safer for whom?" She rolled her eyes. "We've been running this place just fine without your interference." The word stung. Interference. Brian stepped forward, trying that gentle tone he'd used as a boy when he'd knocked over a vase. "Mom, we're handling things. You raised me to be responsible. Trust us." I looked around again, at the half-stocked pantry, the flies buzzing over the water bowls, the broken light in the ceiling. "I'm not leaving," I said. They didn't yell, didn't threaten. They just smiled, like I was a silly old woman poking her nose where it didn't belong. "Fine," Lacey said. "Stay. But if you want to hang around the dogs, you follow safety protocols." She led me to the far end of the kennels, where a cage stood empty. One of the larger ones, usually used for recovering dogs who needed isolation. I walked in, still trying to believe this was their idea of a joke. "Wait here," she said. "Brian and I will finish some paperwork, then we'll talk." She shut the cage door behind me. The latch clicked. I heard the lock turn. They walked away, laughing. Then the lights went off. The dogs barked for a while, then went quiet, one by one. I sat in the dark, knees drawn to my chest, and felt the ache settle into my bones. They didn't come back. I thought maybe it was a test. Maybe they wanted me to see what the dogs felt like. If that was their intent, they succeeded. The cold crawled up my spine. The concrete floor seeped through my skirt. Somewhere nearby, a dog whimpered. I answered back, softly. I'm here. I didn't sleep. Not really. I drifted in and out, leaning against the wire wall, thinking about Harold. He would have lost his temper. He was a quiet man, but he had fire when it came to injustice. Martha, he used to say, you don't let anyone tell you what your worth is. You decide that yourself. I must have dozed, because suddenly there was light. The sound of keys. The soft shuffle of sneakers. Mrs. H? It was Rosa, the janitor, barely 20, and the only one who ever looked me in the eye. What the hell? Sorry. What are you doing in there? They locked me in, I said calmly, rising to my feet. Would you mind opening the door? She hesitated, then turned the key. I stepped out stiffly, my body aching in protest. I smelled like dog hair and ammonia. My hair was matted, my mouth dry, but my spine was straight. Rosa looked horrified. Do you want me to call someone? The police? No, I said, brushing off my skirt. But I do need a phone. I have a few calls to make. By 9 that morning, I'd spoken to my lawyer. By 10, my financial advisor. By 11, I had the keys to my late husband's old office in town. At noon, the board meeting was scheduled. And by then, Brian and Lacey still didn't know what was coming. I took the longest shower of my life that morning, scrubbing away the stench of wet concrete, dog hair, and my own quiet shame. I stood under the water until my skin went red, but I still didn't feel clean. It wasn't the dirt. It was what they'd done. What he had done. My own son. The boy I nursed through fevers. The boy I once carried 4 blocks in the rain when his shoes gave out. Had locked me in a cage like a thing. And laughed. I didn't cry. I haven't cried in years, not since Harold passed. But something inside me burned. Not anger, not sadness, a slow, cold clarity. I sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a towel, and opened the drawer where I kept old files. Bank statements, tax returns, Harold's will. I hadn't touched that drawer in a long time. Not because I forgot it, but because I trusted. Trust, as it turns out, is a dangerous luxury. I found the deed to the shelter building, signed in both our names. I found the operating agreement from 12 years ago when we converted the place into a nonprofit. And then I found something I'd nearly forgotten about. A durable power of attorney drafted after Harold's first heart scare. I was listed as primary authority. Brian's name wasn't anywhere on it. They'd told me they were managing things, that I'd signed it over, that it was handled. But nothing had been handled. They hadn't even bothered to check the paperwork, just assumed the old lady had given up. I made a pot of coffee and called Mr. Benton, our old attorney. I hadn't spoken to him since Harold's funeral, but his voice on the phone was just as calm as I remembered. Martha, he said, what can I do for you? I told him everything, plainly, without embellishment. I told him about the cage, about the lies, about the slow, quiet push they'd been giving me out the door for months. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a pause. Then, I'll be at your house in an hour. While I waited, I went back through the financials. Brian had set up a new operating account for the shelter. I hadn't asked questions at the time. Why would I? It made sense. Or so I thought. But I still had access to the original accounts. And more importantly, I still had my money. There was one account they didn't know about. A savings account Harold and I had opened after selling our second property. It was supposed to be for travel, for grand adventures we never took. We left it untouched for years. After he passed, I just let it sit. It still held $138,000. I smiled to myself as I logged in and confirmed the balance. Not enough to buy the world, but enough to make a statement. Mr. Benton arrived exactly when he said he would. He wore the same gray blazer and carried the same worn leather briefcase. "You kept everything in good order," he said, flipping through the papers I'd laid out. "This is more than enough." I poured us both coffee. "How quickly can we act?" He looked up, eyes sharp. "Immediately." He made the calls while I watched the clock tick toward noon. We called the Secretary of State's office to confirm registration. We requested a certified copy of the deed. We contacted the county records office for the most recent filings. At each step, the same conclusion surfaced. Legally, I still held control. They'd built their throne on assumptions. Mr. Benton tapped the last document. "They've been using the property as their residence?" I nodded. "Moved in last month. Said it made fiscal sense to consolidate expenses. Claimed they were renovating their old place. Then they're in violation of the zoning agreement." He opened his briefcase. "I'll draft the cease and desist today." It felt like breathing after a long time underwater. Not victory, not yet. But breath. Oxygen. At 2:00, I called Rosa. "Hi, sweetheart. I hope you're okay after this morning." She sounded sheepish. I'm so sorry, Mrs. H. I didn't know what to do. I mean, it looked like—" "I'm not angry," I said gently. "You did what you could, but I need your help again. Anything." I asked her to meet me at the shelter in the morning. Told her we'd be making some changes. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself. And maybe a camera." By sunset, everything was in motion. Mr. Benton had filed a motion for immediate board review. The bank was alerted to freeze all activity on the unauthorized account. And the keys to Harold's old office were in my hand. I'd be using the space again, starting tomorrow. I stood at the threshold of that office as dusk settled. The smell of old carpet and dust heavy in the air. The furniture was covered in sheets, but his desk stood just as we left it. I uncovered it slowly, reverently. There was still a coffee stain in the corner, the shape of his favorite mug. I sat down and placed the file folders in a neat stack. Took a deep breath. I wasn't doing this for revenge. Not really. I was doing this because they had turned something sacred, a place of rescue, of dignity, into a business, into a ladder for their egos. And because when they locked me in that cage, they thought I'd sit there like a mutt waiting for a pat on the head. But I built that place. And tomorrow, I'd take it back. The house was too quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that doesn't rest. It scratches at you, reminds you of everything that used to fill the air. Harold's chair stood untouched in the corner, the cushion still dented in the shape of his back. I sat in my own, with a cup of tea I'd forgotten to drink, watching the light fade through the curtains. The cage had left a bruise on my arm, a dark ring where the metal bar pressed against me all night. I touched it now and then, not out of pain, but memory. A reminder. I didn't tell anyone else what happened that day. Not yet. Not my neighbor. Not my friend Nancy. Not even Emma from church, who always sensed when something was off. Some truths aren't ready to be spoken aloud. Some truths need action first. I opened the drawer under the hall table, the one where I kept the checkbooks. That drawer used to be full of life, permission slips, snack money, Harold scribbled grocery lists. Now, just papers. One thick envelope sat at the back, with Brian's name on it. It held the canceled checks I'd written to him over the years. $15,000 to help with the down payment on their first home. $6 out of $200 to cover Lacey's dental work when she chipped a tooth skiing. $3,400 for unforeseen moving costs. Dozens more, smaller, constant, like breadcrumbs leading to a truth I hadn't wanted to face. And all this time, they'd made me feel like a burden. It wasn't just the money. It was the way they spoke to me, like I needed managing, like I was an errand they kept postponing. Last Thanksgiving, I'd brought homemade pies. Brian looked right through me and asked if I'd just leave them on the counter. Lacey never said thank you. At Christmas, they gave me a scented candle. I'm allergic to perfumes. When I mentioned it gently, Lacey said, "Oh, well, regift it." And still, I kept showing up, hoping, making excuses for them in my head. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they don't realize how they sound. Maybe they still love me, just don't know how to show it. But now I knew better. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table again, papers spread in front of me, watching the hours tick by. At 5 a.m., I made coffee. Strong, black, the way Harold liked it. At 5:30, I put on the navy cardigan with the reinforced buttons. At 6, I packed a file folder, a set of duplicate keys, and 2 extra pens. And at 6:45, I locked my door behind me and drove to the shelter. It was still dark when I arrived, but the porch lights were on. Rosa's car was already in the lot. She stood waiting by the side entrance, clutching a folder of her own. "You're early," I said. She shrugged, sheepish. "Didn't sleep. Couldn't stop thinking about what happened." We didn't hug. We just nodded at each other and walked inside. The place smelled like old bleach and damp cement. Familiar, but wrong. I let the silence settle before turning on the hallway lights. "They're not in yet?" I asked. "No. They usually get here around 8. "Good." We walked past the rows of kennels. The dogs stirred, some wagging their tails, others peering sleepily from behind bars. One older shepherd mix let out a soft bark. I knelt and whispered, "We're fixing it." In Harold's old office, now used as some kind of storage space, we cleared boxes and cleaned dust. I laid out my papers. Rosa opened her laptop and connected to the security feed. "They haven't touched the cameras in weeks," she said. "All the files are here." The footage showed it clearly. Me being guided into the cage, Brian shutting the door, Lacey locking it, both of them laughing. "That's more than enough," Rosa said quietly. "You sure you want to go through with this?" I looked at the screen, at the pause button on Lacey's face, mid-laugh. "I'm not doing this to punish them," I said. "I'm doing this to protect what we built." At 8:07, the front door opened. Their voices floated through the hall. "Dog food shipment is delayed again. Just call the supplier and threaten to cancel. That usually speeds things up." I stepped into the hallway as they turned the corner. Brian saw me first. His smile froze halfway. "Mom?" I didn't answer. Lacey frowned. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here because I never left," I said. "You just forgot whose name is still on the deed." They exchanged a glance. "What are you talking about?" Brian asked, forced calm creeping into his voice. "You'll find out in about 5 minutes," I said. "Board review is happening this morning. Mr. Benton will be joining us. In the meantime, you're not to touch a single paper, not to log into a single system, and not to speak to a single employee. Is that clear?" Lacey scoffed. "You can't just walk in here and—" "I can," I interrupted, "and I have. The shelter is under emergency review for mismanagement, financial fraud, and abuse of authority." Brian took a step forward. "This is insane." I raised my hand. "I spent the night in a dog cage. You put me there. You shut the lights. You laughed. And you left." His jaw tightened. I'm not insane. I'm awake. He started to protest, but Rosa stepped out from the office, laptop in hand. We have footage. Lacey turned red. Brian froze. I suggest, I said, you find yourself a good lawyer. Then I turned my back on them and walked into the office. The clock struck 8:15, and the board began to arrive. The room was full before the hour turned. Folding chairs, a coffee pot from the staff lounge, a stack of manila folders with tabs labeled neatly in Rosa's handwriting. The board members arrived one by one, mostly retirees like me, a couple of younger folks, 2 former vets, 1 woman who'd volunteered for over 20 years, people who remembered what this shelter used to be. They hadn't been summoned formally in years. Brian always managed things on email, if at all. But now they came, every one of them, when I called. I stood by Harold's old desk and nodded to each as they entered. Thank you for coming, I said, and I meant it. When the door clicked shut, Mr. Benton cleared his throat. Let's begin. Brian and Lacey sat at the far end. They didn't speak. Brian's face was stiff, unreadable. Lacey kept looking at her phone like the right message might save her. Mr. Benton started with the footage. We didn't play the sound. We didn't need to. The images spoke for themselves. Me, ushered into the cage, the lock, the lights, Brian's back as he walked away. A rustle moved through the room like a breeze. Not outrage. Not yet. Just the air shifting around the truth. When it ended, Mr. Benton laid out the papers. Here is the original deed. Here are the nonprofit bylaws. Here is the power of attorney. You'll note that nothing has been legally amended. There was no vote, no signed transfer, no board consultation. Someone at the back murmured, not even an email. I stepped forward, hands folded. For months, I've been told to stay out, that it's not my place anymore, that they know better. I let the silence hang. I'm not here because I want to run everything again. I'm here because we built this place with our bare hands. Because animals who can't speak for themselves need advocates. Because no one, not even family, has the right to erase someone while they're still breathing. A few people nodded. I trusted them, I added. That was my mistake. But now I'm correcting it. Rosa passed out folders, expenses, purchase orders, vendor contracts. Mr. Benton explained the discrepancies, inflated costs, missing invoices, a sudden uptick in consulting fees with no documentation. None of it illegal, not outright, but all of it wrong. I didn't look at Brian. I didn't need to. His silence was louder than anything. When the vote was called, it wasn't close. 12 in favor of emergency removal, 1 abstention, a man who said he didn't like drama. The rest voted to reinstate me as acting director, effective immediately. Brian finally stood. This is ridiculous. You think she can run this place? She hasn't been involved in years. I haven't been allowed to be involved, I corrected. You're not thinking long term. This place needs modern systems, scalable growth. This place needs blankets, Rosa cut in, and working light bulbs, and food that's not expired. Lacey jumped in, voice shrill. You don't know what you're doing. You're emotional. You're doing this to punish us. I looked at her, calm. No, Lacey. If I were doing this to punish you, I'd let you keep going until the IRS found you. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Mr. Benton handed them each a sealed envelope. Here are your notices. Your access has been revoked. Any attempt to return without board approval will be considered trespassing. And just like that, it was done. They left the room like strangers, silent, small, without fire. The rest of us stayed. We made lists. We divided tasks. Rosa pulled out a whiteboard that had been gathering dust. One woman offered to call the old volunteers. Another started cataloging donations. I walked the kennels again around noon. The dogs were more alert now. They sensed something shifting. One little mutt with crooked ears pressed his nose to the bars as I passed. I knelt down, palm out. He sniffed, then licked my hand once. "Hello, sweetheart," I whispered. By evening, I was back home. The sun hung low, and the bruise on my arm had darkened. I made soup. I lit a candle, unscented. I poured a single glass of wine from the bottle Harold used to save for birthdays. The phone rang twice. Unknown numbers. I didn't answer. Let them wonder. Let them feel silence for once, the way I had for months. I stepped onto the porch and listened to the cicadas. The street was quiet, except for a neighbor's TV through a half-open window. I stood there for a long time, letting the night settle around me. Tomorrow would be busy. But tonight, I was just a woman in her chair, in her home, finally breathing. I didn't sleep, not really. I don't know if anyone could, on that floor, in that cold. The mat was thin, barely more than a pad, and the metal beneath it seemed to hold on to every breath of damp that lingered in the air. My back ached within the hour, my hips within 2. But it wasn't the pain that kept me awake. It was the silence. Real silence, not the peaceful kind. This was the silence of being forgotten. The shelter, after hours, is a different world. No volunteers, no phones, no footsteps. Just the occasional shuffle of paws or the soft, restless sound of dogs turning in their sleep. Some whimpered. Some barked once or twice. One, I think, was having a nightmare. He scratched at the wall of his kennel in his sleep, then cried out. I whispered to him. I didn't know his name. Brian and Lacey had changed the tagging system, but I'd known hundreds of dogs, and fear sounds the same in every throat. My voice reached him through the bars. It's all right, baby. I'm here. He settled. I stayed seated, leaning against the wire wall. My coat was thin. They hadn't even let me bring my bag inside. I still don't know what they were thinking. Maybe it started as a joke. Maybe they wanted to teach me a lesson. Maybe it was just a petty, cruel moment that got out of hand. Whatever it was, they didn't come back. At some point in the night, I started talking. Not loud, just enough for the sound of my voice to remind me I was real. I spoke to Harold. Well, here we are, I said. Back in the shelter. Not quite the way we imagined it. I told him what they'd done. I told him about the blankets being removed, the food orders shrinking, the donations being mismanaged. I told him about Rosa, about how she looked at me with wide, horrified eyes when she found me in the morning. I told him I'd seen the documents, that I was going to fix it, that I was going to take back what was ours. But before all that, in the dark, I told him the truth. I should have listened to my gut months ago. Because the signs had been there. Lacey's clipped tone whenever I called. We're busy right now, Martha. Brian's insistence that I not worry myself with the day-to-day. The way he'd laughed when I asked about the heating system. You don't need to stress about the plumbing, Mom. And the volunteers. Good, decent people I'd worked alongside for years. Quietly replaced. Their names vanished from the contact sheets. Not even a goodbye. They didn't take the shelter from me in one move. They took it inch by inch. And I let them. Sitting in that cage, surrounded by the rustle and sigh of sleeping animals. I thought about all the little ways we give ourselves away, the way we silence our doubts out of love, the way we swallow disrespect out of peace, the way we convince ourselves we're needed only in the ways others decide. Harold would have been furious, but not surprised. He always said I was too patient for my own good. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, I curled onto my side. It was the only position my hips could tolerate. My knees pressed to my chest, my fingers stiff from the cold. And I waited. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even hope they'd come back. What I felt wasn't desperation. It was decision. By the time light started to filter through the small windows above the kennels, I had made up my mind. No more waiting. No more asking. No more pretending. They'd locked me in here thinking I was harmless. They forgot who built the place. When Rosa came, fumbling with the keys and whispering, "Oh my God," over and over, I stood without help. My legs trembled a little, but I stood. I walked out without asking where they were or why they hadn't returned. I didn't need explanations. What they'd said was louder than any apology could undo. "She's no different from strays." That's what they said. Funny thing is, they meant it as an insult. But I looked around that place, at the scratched walls, the cracked bowls, the animals waiting in silence for kindness, and I thought, maybe that's exactly what I am. A stray they thought no one would come looking for. But strays survive. Strays find their way home. And sometimes, strays bite back. That morning, while they still slept in their warm beds, I drove home with stiff fingers and a full heart. Not a broken one, not anymore. I had something better. I had resolve. The mug was warm in my hands, and the kitchen smelled of percolated coffee and linoleum. I sat at the table where Harold used to balance the shelter's books, spreading butter on toast I wasn't hungry for, staring out the window at the empty street. It was barely 7 a.m., but I was already dressed, hair pulled back tight, shoes polished. My coat hung on the back of the chair like it was waiting for me to step back into my role, not as a mother, not as a retiree, but as the founder of something that mattered. I picked up the phone and dialed Benton's direct line. He answered after 2 rings. "Martha," he said. "How bad was it?" "Worse than I thought," I said. "But not bad enough to break me." I didn't think it would be. He sounded wide awake, as if he'd been waiting for the call. "I need you today," I said. "At the shelter. 9 sharp. Bring everything. I'll be there." I hung up and moved through the house like I used to when we were getting ready for inspections. Intentional, methodical, focused. I packed a leather folder with every paper that bore my name. Incorporation docs, tax filings, the original city zoning agreements. I found my key ring, still holding the brass original to the front gate. It had tarnished from disuse. I polished it with the hem of my sweater. By 8 I was in the car, heading to Harold's old office downtown. The building was older now, sagging a little in the middle, but it still stood. The office inside smelled of dust and old files, the scent of quiet work done right. I flicked on the light and pulled the blinds open. Sunlight spilled over the empty desk. I laid out my documents, lined up my pens, booted the old desktop. Rosa would be arriving at the shelter soon to keep an eye on things. I'd asked her not to warn Brian and Lacey, let them walk into the storm without a map. At 8:57, Benton knocked on the door. He looked as crisp as ever. Gray suit, dark tie, that same worn leather briefcase. He didn't waste time. He spread out a copy of the operating charter. You still hold controlling interest. No vote was ever called to change that. He slid me another paper. Here's the durable power of attorney you executed after Harold's second heart event. It was never revoked. Another document. And this is the bylaws clause on misuse of authority. We're invoking it. Today. He met my eyes. We're going in with full documentation. If they resist, we escalate. I don't want to fight, I said, but I won't let them stay. It won't be a fight. Not if you walk in like you still own the place. I do, I said simply. He smiled. We left the office and drove in separate cars. As I pulled into the gravel lot behind the shelter, I saw Rosa already standing near the side entrance. She nodded to me, a tight, respectful nod. A silent, "It's time." Brian's truck was there. So was Lacey's car. Good. Inside, the reception area smelled of stale coffee and too much air freshener. The walls had been stripped of the old art. Instead, laminated infographics and meaningless slogans lined the hallway. Efficiency is compassion. Optimize every paw step. Words that sounded like a sales pitch and meant nothing. I walked down the hall with Benton at my side. Rosa opened the staff door, and we stepped into the heart of the shelter. Brian stood at the central desk, tapping on a tablet. He looked up when he heard the door open and froze. "Mom?" I said nothing, just handed him a copy of the order. "What is this?" he asked, eyes flicking over the page. Lacey appeared behind him, adjusting her coat. "Are you serious? You can't be serious." "You're hereby suspended from all duties," Benton said calmly. "Effective immediately, pending full board review." "You don't have the authority." "I do," I said, voice even. "And I'm exercising it." They looked between the two of us, then at Rosa, who stood by the kennels with her arms crossed. "You locked me in a cage," I said. "You left me overnight like an abandoned dog. And you stole what didn't belong to you." Brian's mouth opened, then closed. He looked pale. "You called me a stray," I added. "You're right, I was. But stray doesn't mean broken. It means no one's claimed you yet." Rosa stepped forward and handed me a small bundle. It was the original binder, the one with the intake logs, the old shift schedules, the handwritten notes Harold used to leave in the margins. I ran my hand over the cover like it was a relic. It was. "I'm claiming this place again," I said. "Effective now." Lacey threw up her hands. "You're being emotional." "Yes," I said, "because this place was built on emotion, on love, on dignity, not greed." Benton placed the formal notice on the desk. "You have until the end of the day to collect your personal belongings. After that, your access codes will be revoked." They didn't argue. Not anymore. I didn't ask for an apology. I didn't need it. Instead, I turned to the dogs. They lined the kennels, some barking, some silent. But their eyes followed me as I moved. Recognition, even after all this time. One of the older girls, a scrappy little terrier named Midge, barked once, sharp and short. I knelt by her gate. "We're back, sweetheart," I whispered. "We're home." And I meant it. The office smelled like old wood and lavender cleaner. Harold always hated the stuff, said it reminded him of his mother's parlor, the one room in her house no one was allowed to sit in. I used it anyway, not out of spite, but because it lingered, like memory. I sat behind his desk for the first time in years, the sun warming my shoulders through the window. Rosa had brought in a thermos of coffee and a sandwich I didn't touch. The binder of old records lay open beside me, and the computer hummed softly. For the first time in a long while, the place felt like mine again. Not because of the keys in my hand, but because I remembered why we built it. At 9 sharp, I called the bank. My voice was steady when I gave my name, my security details, and requested access to the account Harold and I had opened 15 years ago. The woman on the line paused. "Ma'am, are you aware this account hasn't been accessed in—" "I'm aware," I said. "It's time." There was a rustle of keyboard clacks. "You still have full control. The last activity was a deposit in 2013. Would you like a balance check?" "Yes, please." She read the number. I wrote it down slowly, letting the ink etch it into the paper. 138th on 7/11/54. "Would you like to make a withdrawal?" "No," I said. "I'd like to transfer $25,000 to a new account under the shelter's original nonprofit registration. I'll come by in person to sign the paperwork." "Understood, Mrs. Hale." After I hung up, I sat there for a long moment, just looking at the total. Harold would have smiled. He never trusted the market, never liked risks. That money had sat quietly for years, untouched, earning slow interest while we lived our lives. I'd nearly forgotten it was there. And now it would buy us a restart. A real one. I called Rosa next. "We've got seed money," I said. "We can restock supplies, hire back 2 of the old staff part-time, and fix the heating in the East Wing." She laughed. "You move fast, Mrs. H." "I've been still for too long." That afternoon, I drove to the bank branch. The same place where Harold and I had signed our first business loan in the early 80s. The manager was new, young, nervous, probably born after our first dog run opened. But he was respectful, efficient. He didn't blink when I told him I wanted to separate all shelter accounts from any records Brian had touched. He only said, "Would you like to add any new signatories?" "Not yet," I replied. "That kind of trust has to be earned." The paperwork took an hour. By the time I left, I had 3 folders in my bag and a new debit card in my wallet. My name on everything. No more middlemen. No more letting people speak for me. I stopped at the hardware store on the way back, picked up a new padlock for the back supply shed, then the animal supply wholesaler, then the pet bakery downtown that used to donate treats before Brian streamlined the donor list. At each stop, I reintroduced myself. "Martha Hale, I'm back." People didn't ask what happened. They just smiled or hugged me or pressed a business card into my hand. One woman teared up. "You remembered our birthday drive in 2009, she said. "I still have the photo of you and Harold with the Labradoodle in a party hat." That night, I came home exhausted, but sharp. My body was sore, hips stiff, legs aching, but my mind buzzed with clarity. I heated soup, poured tea, and sat with a notepad. I made a list. New food supplier? Call Joanne volunteer schedule. Ask Rosa to draft social media. Contact Charlotte, used to run our Facebook page. Staff uniforms. Get quotes. Veterinary contracts. Schedule consult. At the bottom of the list, I wrote, rebuild, but better. I didn't want to return to what the shelter had been. I wanted it to become what it should have been all along. Open, honest, kind. Not just a place for animals, but for people who'd been cast aside. For the strays, the forgotten, the left behind. I shut off the lights and walked slowly to the bedroom. On the way, I passed Harold's picture. The one of us on the front porch of the original building, a puppy in my lap, his hand on my shoulder. "Turns out," I murmured, "you were right to save that money." The picture didn't answer, but I felt steadier just the same. Tomorrow would be busy. The work was just beginning, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like the woman who once built something out of nothing, and I was ready to build again. I'd always signed my name the same way, with a looped M and a sharp tail on the E. Harold used to tease me about it, said it looked like a school teacher's signature. But I liked the way it sat on the page. Clear, confident, mine. That's why I noticed it immediately when Mr. Benton laid the file in front of me. "This is the transfer form they submitted to the city," he said. "Filed 6 months ago. You're listed as the outgoing director." I leaned in, adjusted my glasses. The signature at the bottom, my name, printed neatly in blue ink, looked like mine at first glance. But the loop was wrong. The tail wasn't sharp, and something about the rhythm of the stroke was off. "That's not mine," I said. "I didn't think so." He pulled out another page. "Here's a copy of your actual signature from the 2015 zoning renewal." Side by side, it was clear as day. The forgery wasn't even subtle. Whoever signed had practiced, yes, but hadn't lived in my hand. "They forged this," I said quietly, "to gain full control." He nodded. "We're preparing a formal challenge. The board action already gave you back operational authority, but this is different. This is fraud. It's criminal." I didn't speak for a while. Betrayal is funny. It's not a sudden sting, not always. Sometimes it settles over you slowly, like a damp blanket. I thought back to every moment I'd made excuses for Brian. Every time I told myself he was just overwhelmed, just tired, just trying his best. He'd signed my name. He'd faked me out of my own life. "I want that filing revoked," I said. Publicly, loudly. I don't care if it embarrasses him. Benton's smile was grim. "It will. But more importantly, it'll give you clear grounds to bar them from any future affiliation with the shelter." I nodded. We were sitting in Harold's old office again, the one with the creaky floor and the faint smell of aged coffee in the walls. The sun streamed through the dusty blinds, warming the edge of the desk where Harold used to rest his arm while working. Rosa knocked softly and stepped inside. "They're back," she said. "Who?" "Brian and Lacey. They pulled into the lot 5 minutes ago. Didn't come in, just sat in the car." I stood slowly. "Let's go say hello." We walked outside together. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn breeze that carried the scent of leaves and the faint edge of wood smoke from someone's chimney. Brian's truck was parked crooked near the back fence. Lacey sat in the passenger seat, arms folded. Brian stepped out when he saw me. He tried to smile. "Hi, Mom." I said nothing. He glanced at Benton, then back at me. "Look, I know we didn't part on the best terms. You forged my name." His smile faltered. "I've seen the documents. You forged my signature. You committed fraud." His face reddened. "It wasn't like that. It was just, we needed to move quickly. You weren't responding, and we thought—" "You thought I wouldn't notice," I said. "You thought I'd go quietly. You thought you could build something on my bones." Lacey got out of the truck, heels clacking against the gravel. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is. You're acting like you were dragged into court." "You're not in court," Benton said calmly. "Yet." She rolled her eyes. "This is petty." I stepped forward. "You locked me in a cage. We didn't—" "You did." The wind picked up, tugging at the corner of Lacey's coat. "I don't want you near the shelter again," I said. "I don't want your names on anything we publish. I don't want your hands on any part of what we built." Brian looked at me, then at Rosa, then at Benton. "You're choosing strangers over your son." "I'm choosing right over wrong," I said. "I should have done it a long time ago." They didn't argue after that. They got in the truck and drove off without another word. I watched the dust rise behind them, watched their figures get smaller in the rearview mirror. Rosa stood beside me. "Do you want to sit down?" "No," I said. "I want to get back to work." We did. That afternoon, we started the formal process of restoring our nonprofit status with the city. We refiled under my name. We sent notices to every former volunteer who'd been pushed out. We posted a quiet but firm announcement on our website. Under new, old leadership, shelter reopening fully next week. Charlotte, our former volunteer coordinator, offered to manage the inbox. "It's been full since noon," she said. "People are coming back. They want to help." By sundown, we had new food shipments on the way, veterinary partnerships reinstated, and a plan to rotate in students from the local college for weekend cleanup work. I stayed late. The halls were quiet, but not the kind of silence I'd felt in that cage. This was a working silence. I walked the rows of kennels one more time, pausing at each gate. Dogs wagged their tails, pressed noses to bars. One barked once, then sat down, watching me. "You'll be okay now," I said softly. "We all will." When I locked up that night, I didn't take the back door. I walked out the front, with my name on the sign where it had always belonged. They were already inside when I arrived. Brian stood near the admin desk, arms crossed, posture stiff. Lacey sat in a chair beside him, scrolling her phone like the screen might offer her a way out. They looked like guests who hadn't been invited, trying to act as if they still belonged. But that morning, everything was different. The shelter's front lobby, freshly cleaned, walls repainted just days before, smelled of citrus and resolve. Rosa had cleared the front windows, and the old hand-painted "Welcome Home" sign now hung above the front door again. We didn't announce anything publicly, but word spread. The volunteers came early, the board members too, and the city liaison, a woman named Janelle, sharp as a tack, with short hair and a clipboard full of stamped approvals. Mr. Benton stood beside me, suit pressed, eyes calm. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I've been ready since the minute they shut the cage." At 9:01 a.m., we walked in together. All heads turned. Brian straightened. "Mom, what is this? Some kind of show?" "No," I said. "This is a return." Lacey stood up slowly, smiling like nothing had happened. "You didn't say there'd be guests." "I didn't need to." Janelle stepped forward. "Brian Hale?" He nodded. "You've been notified of the revocation of your authority over this property. You were given until end of business yesterday to remove your belongings and turn over all access materials." "I didn't agree to that." "You didn't have to," Benton said. "The board voted. The documents are filed, and the city has approved the restoration of original leadership under Mrs. Hale." Lacey looked from face to face, her voice shrill. "You can't just erase us. We've done everything for this place." "You did everything to this place," Rosa said from the doorway. "There's a difference." Brian stepped toward me. "This is still my home." I looked him in the eyes. "No, it never was. You moved in here to save money. You used this place like a stepping stone. You never fed the dogs. You never cleaned a cage. You never stayed past 6. You sat behind the desk and signed invoices for food you didn't order and supplies you never unpacked." His mouth opened, but I didn't stop. "You cut the volunteers. You reduced feeding schedules. You pulled old heaters off the walls and told people it was part of renovations. You forged my signature and locked me in a cage." The room was still. "I've already filed formal fraud charges," I added, But you're not here for that. You're here to hear this from me in front of everyone. I turned slightly, addressing the people gathered. The board, the volunteers, the staff. Faces I hadn't seen in years, familiar hands, familiar eyes. This place was never about money. It was about rescue. It was about dignity, for the animals, and for the people who walked through these doors carrying guilt, fear, or just plain hope. We took strays, of every kind, and we gave them a reason to stand tall again. I looked back at Brian and Lacey. You're not part of that anymore. Benton handed them 2 envelopes. These are formal notices of removal and trespass restriction. You may not enter or represent the shelter in any form moving forward. Lacey scoffed, grabbing her coat. Fine. You think this place is worth saving? You'll see. It'll bleed you dry. I built it once, I said. I can build again. Brian didn't look at me as he left, just walked out the front door with his shoulders hunched, the way he used to when he got caught lying about skipping school. The moment the door closed behind them, the room exhaled. It wasn't applause. It wasn't loud. But it was real. Rosa brought over a tray with mismatched mugs and hot coffee. Janelle signed the final form and handed me a copy. You're officially reinstated, Mrs. Hale. Thank you, I said. Charlotte, our social media volunteer, pulled out her phone. Do we post now? Not yet, I said. Give it a day. I walked through the halls alone after that. Each step felt like a memory, uncovered. The storage closet with the squeaky hinge. The medical room where I once sat with a dog in my lap for hours while we waited for the vet to arrive. The bulletin board where Harold pinned every thank you note. I stood in the center of the kennel room. The dogs stirred, some wagging. A young mutt with patchy fur barked once, then tilted his head. I'm back, I told him. And I'm not leaving again. Behind me, someone turned on the lights. The space filled with warmth. Home, not just to them, but to me again. At last. The first thing I did was throw out the new policies. Brian and Lacey had turned everything into numbers. How many ounces of food per dog? How many minutes per kennel cleaning? How many seconds allowed for volunteers to linger? There was a laminated sheet near the office door that said, "Time is resources. Don't waste either." I tore it off the wall and dropped it in the trash. Time isn't a resource in a place like this. It's the point. You sit with a shaking dog for 20 minutes because that dog has never been touched gently. You scrub the same floor twice because that old beagle's joints ache and she needs the warmth. You linger because sometimes silence and presence are the only gifts you can give. By noon that first day, the shelter smelled different. Not just of bleach and pine cleaner, but of people, of motion. Rosa had opened all the windows, and Charlotte had brought muffins from the bakery down the street. Janelle came back with a box of city-stamped papers and an extra thermos of coffee, just in case. And the volunteers, they came. Old ones, mostly. Joan, who used to hand-stitch dog beds. Mira, who'd taken 2 seniors home just for a week 3 years ago and never brought them back. Even Gus, the retired plumber with bad knees, showed up and asked if we needed help fixing the sink in the back. We did. I didn't give speeches. Didn't make announcements. I just handed people what they needed, gloves, towels, checklists, and said, "Thank you for coming back." They knew what to do. Charlotte updated the social media pages with a simple message. We're open. Come home. Underneath, she posted a picture of Midge, the scrappy terrier. with her front paws up on the kennel gate and her head tilted like she was already posing. By the end of the day, the post had hundreds of comments. Missed you. So glad you're back. Volunteering this weekend. Where do I sign up? We didn't have a marketing budget. We didn't need one. The community remembered. That afternoon, I sat at Harold's old desk with a stack of files in front of me. Vendor contracts, medical forms, adoption follow-ups. Most of it was a mess. Invoices paid twice, others unpaid. Vet appointments canceled. One page said, behavioral risk. Put down? Next to a dog I remembered as shy but sweet. I drew a line through the note and wrote, review with staff. If Lacey had stayed, I don't doubt that dog would have disappeared quietly one weekend. Not anymore. We reinstated full medical checks for all new arrivals, reconnected with the city vet program, called back every volunteer on the old roster. Rosa took charge of training. She had a gift for it. Calm, firm, kind. She remembered how each dog liked to be approached. This one hates being loomed over, crouched down first. That one only takes treats from the left hand. Watching her move through the kennels reminded me of myself 20 years ago. She didn't rush. She saw them. I stayed late again that night. The place still needed repairs. Tiles cracked, ceiling fans slow to start. One of the fences out back sagged slightly. But it was alive again. I walked through the halls as the dogs settled in for the night. Some slept, curled in corners. Some stared with half-lidded eyes. Some wagged, even half asleep, when I passed. I paused outside the cage they'd locked me in. It was empty now. Clean. Rosa had wanted to tear it out completely, but I told her to wait. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I wanted to decide. Pain teaches you. But you don't always need the monument. Maybe one day it would be a medical room again, or a quiet space for new arrivals to decompress, but it would never again be used the way they used it on me. I turned off the lights and walked out the front, locking the door behind me. The sky was soft with evening. The parking lot empty, except for my old sedan. I stood for a moment, letting the air touch my face. The shelter wasn't healed, not yet, but it was breathing again. And so was I. The bell above the front door chimed at 10:03 a.m. It was an old sound, gentle, chipped at the edge. The same brass bell Harold had installed himself back in '91. Said he liked the way it made the dogs perk up. Said a shelter should never feel like a warehouse. I looked up from the intake forms. A woman stood in the doorway, coat zipped high, hands buried in her sleeves. Early 40s, maybe. Nervous around the eyes. A little girl stood beside her, no more than 7, holding tight to a worn pink backpack. We saw the sign, the woman said. Online. I nodded. Come in. You're the first today. They stepped in together. The little girl reached down to unzip her coat, then froze when she heard a bark from down the hallway. Not loud, just one short sound. Curious. She's okay, I said. They all are. The woman nodded slowly. We lost our old boy a few months ago. We weren't going to get another. But she looked down at the girl, who was already wandering toward the photo board near the front desk. She wanted to visit. You don't have to decide today. I know. But I could see it already. The way her eyes scanned the space, not just for animals, but for safety, for kindness. You can always tell when someone walks in afraid of being sold something. We didn't sell here. I asked Rosa to walk them through the kennels. Not push, just guide. I stayed in the office, watching through the glass. The girl pointed at each dog, wide-eyed. At one point, she crouched in front of Midge's kennel. Midge barked once, then sat, tail tapping the floor. The girl tapped back. They were gone for 40 minutes. When they returned, the girl clutched a manila folder, the kind we used for interest files. Her name was written in Rosa's gentle handwriting on the front. "Emma," she said quietly, sliding the folder onto the desk. "I like Midge." "Midge likes you too," I said. Her mother smiled. It wasn't a wide smile, not yet, but it had warmth in it, the kind that says, maybe we'll be okay. They didn't take her home that day. There was still a home check to schedule, paperwork to complete, food to buy. But they promised to return Saturday. And when they left, the girl turned back at the door. "She remembered me," she said. I nodded. "She will tomorrow, too." After they left, I sat for a while in the chair Harold once used for adoption meetings. It creaked a little now. The cushion was worn, but I didn't change it. That chair had held dozens of stories. The moment someone met the dog that would carry them through heartbreak, or help their child sleep again, or give their aging parent something to hold on to. The rest of the day passed in steady motion. Volunteers came and went. Deliveries were unpacked. I signed 3 intake forms and scheduled 2 follow-up vet visits. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, but everything felt alive. That night, as I closed up, I passed Midge's kennel. She stood up when she saw me, tail wagging. "She's coming back," I told her. Midge barked once. I reached in and scratched behind her ears. "She picked you. You lucky thing." But what I didn't say out loud was this. She reminded me, of all of us. Midge, with her graying fur and crooked legs, the kind of dog people overlook. Not flashy, not young, just waiting. And yet, when someone did see her, really saw her, she lit up like a match in a quiet room. That night, I walked home instead of driving, just to feel the air, to stretch my legs, to hear the gravel underfoot. The stars were out. The shelter was back. And the world, for the first time in a long while, felt exactly the size it needed to be. The envelope came on a Tuesday. No return address. Just my name, typed in block letters. The kind of envelope that carries no good news. I opened it slowly, standing by the kitchen sink, the kettle still warming behind me. Inside, a notice from the IRS. Preliminary audit. Flag discrepancies. Prior year filings under review. A short, cold paragraph at the bottom. Failure to respond may result in temporary forfeiture of nonprofit status. I read it twice. Then I folded the letter neatly, placed it on the counter, and poured my tea. The water hissed like it knew. For a long time, I just stood there, staring out the window at the street. The neighbor's cat darted across the sidewalk. A squirrel pawed at the edge of my flower bed. The world continued, the way it always does, even when your heart kicks once in your chest like a warning bell. They had filed under my name, Brian and Lacey. Back when they locked me out and locked the doors behind them, they submitted expense reports, payroll summaries, contractor forms, all under the shelter's ID, all bearing a name they didn't earn. Mine. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. Instead, I took the tea with me to Harold's old desk and laid the letter beside the growing stack of paperwork Rosa and I had been sorting. Vendor contracts, volunteer agreements, medical records, board minutes. I added a new folder to the pile. Label, Audit, 2023 Activity, Unauthorized. At noon, I called Mr. Benton. He wasn't surprised. "I've been waiting for this," he said. Frankly, I'm surprised it took this long. Can we handle it? We can, he said. But you'll need everything. Every financial transaction, every receipt. We'll need to show they operated outside their authority. Which they did. Which will prove. He paused, then added quietly, Martha, this might get ugly. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. It already was. That afternoon, I went to the shelter. The day had that filtered kind of light. Gold around the edges, soft at the core. Rosa met me at the back gate, carrying a clipboard and a bag of feed. We're low on soft chews again, she said, but the vet clinic sent over new samples. I handed her the letter. She read it in silence, jaw tightening. Do they know what they're waking up? She asked. They'll find out. We spent the rest of the day pulling records. Charlotte printed archived screenshots of the old donation pages. Gus, bless his cranky hands, crawled into the storage room to find a shoebox full of handwritten expense logs from before the systems went digital. Every person who'd ever loved this place showed up again. Not for revenge, for protection. The next morning, I was at the city clerk's office before they opened. I requested copies of every zoning, nonprofit, and tax document filed under our name for the last 5 years. Some were clean, some weren't. Brian had submitted multiple expense reports using the shelter's funds for consulting. One vendor, a shell company, if I had to guess, was registered to a P.O. box I didn't recognize. Lacey's name appeared on 5 different credit card statements linked to the shelter's backup account. Personal purchases, clothing, a weekend resort stay marked conference, all of it under our banner, under my name. That night, I brought it home, stacked it on the dining room table beside Harold's old photo. I stood for a long time, looking at it all. Then I sat down and wrote a letter of my own. It wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. It was meticulous. Every date, every discrepancy, every document enclosed. By midnight, the letter was sealed, the envelope addressed. The audit wasn't an attack. It was a chance to lay it all out, to name what had been done, to separate their recklessness from my name, to rebuild, not just in paint and food and wagging tails, but in structure, in legality, in trust. By the end of the week, we had assembled a full response. Mr. Benton filed it directly. We received confirmation 2 days later. The audit was paused pending investigation. No penalties, no shutdowns, just silence. The good kind this time. Relief came not as a wave, but as stillness. I went to the shelter that evening. The last of the sun was slanting through the kennel windows. Midge was asleep, her belly rising and falling. I leaned against the wall and whispered into the quiet. We're not going anywhere. And I meant it. We didn't plan a celebration. There wasn't time. There wasn't budget. There wasn't even consensus. Rosa said we should wait until we really got through the audit, and Gus muttered something about jinxing it. But Charlotte ignored us all and posted an invite anyway. Homecoming Day, this Saturday. No speeches, just dogs, coffee, and the people who made this place real. The message was simple, and the message spread. That morning, the shelter looked nothing like it had the year before. No stiff policies taped to walls. No locked closets with half-stocked shelves. No thin blankets folded like afterthoughts. Instead, there were sun-faded banners from old adoption days, taped lovingly along the fence. There were mismatched chairs on the lawn, borrowed from neighbors and churches and whoever answered Charlotte's call. Someone brought a box of donuts. Someone else brought lemonade. The first volunteer arrived at 7:20 a.m. By 9, the parking lot was full. I stood at the front door holding a clipboard I didn't need, watching people trickle in. Some brought photos, dogs they'd adopted here over the years. Others brought leashes, in case they just happened to meet a new friend. Children ran between kennels with wide eyes and open hands. Old couples strolled the paths in slow tandem. One man, big, quiet, with grease under his nails, walked the same circuit 3 times before settling beside a brindle mutt with one ear bent permanently sideways. He didn't say a word, just sat cross-legged on the concrete, palm out. The dog crept closer. That was enough. Inside, the staff moved with purpose. Rosa handed out treats and towels like a commander dispatching supplies. Charlotte floated between conversations, snapping photos, laughing loudly. Someone put on a playlist, oldies and Motown, and for a moment, it almost felt like time bent backwards. Like Harold might walk through the door again with his clipboard and say, "Looks like a good crowd today." I didn't cry. I didn't even tear up. But I stood still, watching it all, and I felt something move through me that I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the fragile kind. Not the kind you earn by ignoring what's broken. The kind that comes after standing your ground. At noon, we served soup and sandwiches, made by a local diner that used to sponsor us before Brian cut off non-essential community partnerships. They refused payment, just sent over 2 big pots and a handwritten card that said, "Welcome back, Mrs. Hale." No one gave a speech. We didn't need one. The people spoke in presence, in laughter. In the quiet way, they leaned over kennels and whispered names. Late in the afternoon, I sat on the back bench, just outside the intake wing, with a cup of lukewarm coffee in my hand. My knees ached, and my spine reminded me I'd been on my feet since dawn. But I wasn't tired. Charlotte plopped down beside me, waving her phone. We've had 30 adoption inquiries today, 13 confirmed follow-ups, and I just got a message from the mayor's office. They want to feature us in the city newsletter. I raised an eyebrow. We still don't have heating in the back wing. Doesn't matter, she grinned. They love a comeback story. I smiled at that, not because of the mayor, but because she was right. We didn't rebuild this place with money. We rebuilt it with memory, with stubbornness, with love poured back into every corner where it had once been drained. At sunset, people began to leave. Some waved, some hugged. One woman pressed a $20 bill into my hand and said, "I know it's not much, but thank you." I walked the grounds one last time before locking up. The dogs were fed. The trash bins full of paper plates and empty bowls. Someone had folded the chairs and stacked them neatly by the door without being asked. It was the kind of day that didn't beg for recognition. It just was. And that was the miracle of it. As I turned off the porch light and stepped outside, I looked back at the sign above the gate. It had faded over the years, letters a little chipped, paint peeling at the corners. I didn't want to repaint it. I wanted it to stay exactly like that. A little worn, a little bent, but still standing, like me. The audit closed on a Thursday. No fanfare, no call. Just a thick envelope delivered by certified mail, handed over by a postal worker who looked vaguely apologetic, like he expected the contents to ruin my afternoon. It didn't. I opened it slowly, hands steady. Inside, 3 pages, neatly clipped, a summary of findings, a formal exoneration, a note from the examiner, typed but unmistakably human. Thank you for your clarity and cooperation. Your stewardship of the shelter, both past and present, reflects a commitment we rarely see sustained across decades. Please consider this matter closed. I read it twice. Then I placed the letter down, smoothed the page with my palm, and sat very still. Not from shock, not from relief, from something deeper. The kind of stillness that only comes when the long-held breath of a year, or maybe 5, is finally released. I poured a small glass of Harold's Scotch. Not much. Just enough to mark the moment. The bottle had dust on the cap, and I wiped it clean with the edge of my sleeve. He'd saved it for birthdays. I was saving it for this. I raised the glass toward his picture on the mantel. "We did it," I said, without shouting, without begging. Just the way you taught me. Quiet, steady, right. Then I took one slow sip. The next morning, I brought the letter to the shelter and placed a copy in the admin binder. Rosa read it without speaking, then placed her hand briefly over mine. "No one else would have held on," she said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. News spread faster than I expected. That same day, the local newspaper called. A young reporter, probably half my age, asked if I'd be open to an interview. "It's for a feature on community resilience," she said. "A lot of people think what you did here is, well, remarkable." "I didn't do it alone," I told her. "But you were the first," she said. I agreed to speak with her the following week, under one condition: no dramatics. No headlines about cages or betrayal. Just facts. Just what it means to protect something because it's right, not because it's profitable or impressive. She agreed. That weekend, donations ticked up. Small amounts mostly. A note scribbled on one envelope said, "For Midge, for whoever's next." "For you." I pinned it to the bulletin board in the back office. By Sunday, Rosa had rearranged the storage room, turned it into a proper intake suite with fresh towels, a better scale, and a heating pad for seniors. Gus finally fixed the sagging fence. Charlotte organized a school visit with a local 5th-grade class. The place had rhythm now. Breath. People kept asking if I'd retire again. "Let someone else take the lead this time," one board member said gently. "You've done enough." Maybe I had. But there was still something unfinished inside me. Not resentment, not pride, just a quiet insistence that I'd know when the last box was closed, when the last stitch had been sewn. That moment hadn't come yet. Then, just before closing on Monday, the girl came back. Emma, the one with the pink backpack and the quiet smile. She stood in the doorway, her mother beside her, holding a leash. Midge trotted beside them, tail high, face brighter than I'd ever seen it. "We wanted to say thank you," the mother said. "For everything." Emma held something in her small hands. A drawing. Crayon on thick paper. It was Midge, unmistakable, with her crooked ears and spotted coat, drawn beside a house with a red roof and a garden full of blue flowers. She handed it to me without a word. On the bottom, in careful printing, "Miss Martha's dogs find homes." I felt something catch in my throat. "You remembered," I said softly. Emma nodded. "You helped her remember how to be good." I bent slowly, knees crackling, bones reminding me of their age, and hugged her gently. Not long. Just enough. When they left, Midge looked back once. I waved. That night, I sat by the front gate after lockup, the drawing in my lap. The porch light buzzed above me. The air was thick with the hum of late summer. The shelter was safe. The name was mine again. The damage had been undone, or at least exposed to the light. And still, something in me stayed watchful. Not bitter, not afraid, just awake. Because no one tells you that after the fire, after the clawing and the proving and the winning, What you're left with isn't pride. It's stewardship. And I wasn't done carrying that yet. I gave Rosa the keys on a Tuesday. Not ceremonially, not with speeches or handshakes or cameras. Just quietly, in the intake room, while she was filling out a form for a 3-legged collie that had come in overnight. She looked up when I walked in. "You're early," she said. I held out the keyring, the brass one, the original. She stared at it like it was made of gold. "Are you sure?" she asked. I nodded. "It's time." She didn't argue. That's why I chose her. She wasn't trying to be anyone. She just was. Reliable. Steady. The kind of person who doesn't need to prove anything because she already lives it. "You're not leaving, though," she said. "Right?" "I'll still be here," I said. "Just not behind that desk, or in that chair, or signing every invoice." Rosa smiled, but I saw the hesitation behind it. "I've already failed once," I added, "by stepping back and not looking closely enough. I'm not making that mistake again. But watching is different from clinging." She nodded slowly. "You're not the clinging type." "No," I said. "But I am the remembering type." That afternoon, I took one last walk through the shelter as its director. The dogs were quiet, fed, calm, the rooms clean, the staff smiling. A group of school kids was crouched in the visitation area, drawing their favorite dogs on construction paper. One boy drew Midge in a cape. She didn't mind. She always did love the dramatic ones. Out back, the vegetable patch Charlotte started was already sprouting. Tomatoes, peppers, basil. "For enrichment," she said, "and maybe a little for us." There were signs of life everywhere. Not survival. Life. And in that, I found my answer. It didn't need me to hold every part anymore. I had brought it back to breath. Now someone else could teach it to sing. That evening, I went home and took down the last of Harold's files. Not because they didn't matter, but because they'd served their time. I wrapped them in twine, labeled the box, and slid it gently onto the shelf. Then I lit a candle, poured one small glass of wine, and opened the window. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like someone brushing past the curtains. Not urgent, just present. Like Harold, maybe. Or maybe just time. Before bed, I opened the drawing Emma had given me one last time. Miss Martha's Dogs Find Homes. It wasn't true anymore. They found theirs. Now it was someone else's turn to keep the door open. And maybe, if you're still reading this, if you're wondering whether it's worth fighting back, whether dignity can be reclaimed, whether kindness can be louder than cruelty, maybe it's yours. So take this as your sign. Go back. Fix what they said was broken beyond repair. Say what they told you wasn't worth saying. Stand where they tried to erase you. Because they were wrong, and you're not done yet. Like I told Midge once with my hand pressed to the cold steel gate. We're home. Now it's your turn to keep the lights on. If this story meant something to you, share it. Leave a comment. Let someone else know they're not alone.